In this video, we're going to have a look at cutting out the sections of the cross halving joint that we've marked out previously for our mobile device stand. So it eventually looks something a bit like this that can then be slotted together and made into something that can hold your phone or mobile device. So for that then, we're going to make a start on the part 1 piece to begin with. I'm going to put part 2 to the side. I'm going to take part 1 and I'm going to pop it into the vise so it's nice and secure. I'm going to lay that into there like that. Trying to make sure this is as parallel as possible to the vise to make things a bit easier for me as well. We're then going to use two tools for this next part. We're going to use either a engineering square, which we spoke about previously, or a tri-square. Either is fine to begin with. We're also going to use a tool called a marking knife. So we have a marking knife here, okay? It's really important when we're not using the marking knife that the blade stays within the casing so no one gets hurt or damaged with it. Once we're going to use the marking knife, we're looking for the knife to be extended ever so slightly, and then the second button here locking the knife into place so it's not going to move any further. We do not want to see the marking knife extended any further than this, as this can be dangerous, and the blade is also very thin and is likely to snap under pressure if you have too much of the blade out at once. So ensure that the blade is only just coming out of the casing and it is always locked in place when you're using it. Okay, so for this next stage, I'm going to take my engineering square or tri-square, whatever is to hand. I'm going to line this up on the edge of the MDF with my mark that I made previously. And with my marking knife, I'm going to lay it down alongside the engineering square using this straight edge here to now come in and mark in a couple of scores. Now you won't mark this in the first attempt. You're going to have to come in and go over the same section a good number of times to make a nice indent into the MDF. We're looking for a nice straight cut along the pencil line you've previously made. So I'm going over this quite a few times just to make sure it is as deep as I can get it. And then from there, I'm going to move along to my next line and do the same process, ensuring that the knife is resting against this, keeping us safe from the blade coming near our fingers. I'm just coming in here again, I'm just repeating the process, going over this quite a few times. Want to make sure I've got a nice, decent cut into the MDF. And once I'm happy I've cut in a little bit, I can then put my tools down, retract the knife back into the casing and lock it in place and lay it on the bench. For this next section, we're going to take a new tool. This is called a bevel-edged chisel. It's called a bevel-edged chisel because of the bevel that runs along the edges here. Okay, we're going to use this to cut out a wee section of this bit of MDF to allow us to get a nice straight cut line with a 10-inch saw in a wee minute. Okay, when we are using the bevel-edged chisel, it is incredibly important we keep the blades away from ourselves. We never point it towards anyone or ourselves. It is always facing outward. Okay, always making sure all parts of our body are this side of the blade. We always make sure that the work is secured as well. We never use a chisel on work that's not secured, as that's not that safe, and if it does move, it can come in and injure somebody. So I'm now going to look at making a little V-groove in each section here that's just been made with my marking knife. So I'm going to place my bevel-edged chisel onto the MDF. I'm then going to elevate it by about 45 degrees, and then I'm just going to apply pressure from this hand on the handle down into the MDF, making sure I've got a second hand on this part of the chisel as a secure grip. I'm just going to come in, little wiggle, and I'm just going to chip out that little bit of MDF. You can see the waste material just popping out there, and away that goes. I'm then going to come round to the other side, do the same again, making sure the chisel starts within the waste wood, and I'm applying pressure along until it reaches that line that I've just made with my marking knife. What we have just made there is called a V-groove. So the V-groove can be seen here, and it allows us to put a 10-inch saw into here to then cut down out of the waste wood, protecting the shoulders off the bit of wood we want to keep for later on. To start cutting out this section of the MDF, we're going to use something called a tenon saw. We have a tenon saw here. We have this section of the tenon saw, which is rigid, and that means it's not going to wiggle as you saw down. And then we have the handle here. As we hold the tenon saw, we hold it like this, keeping our index finger out like that to allow us a bit more control as we saw downwards. Okay, so when we are sawing, we need to make sure we secure this into the vise. We're going to take our piece of work and a piece of waste wood. We're then going to rest this into the vise with the piece of waste wood, and what I'm looking to do is line up the waste wood with my pencil line along here. So I'm going to line it up like that. This is going to act as a guide for me sawing. I'm then going to tighten both of them into the vise like so, making sure that the line I'm going to cut to is above the sides of the vise so we don't damage them, as shown here. We then want to take our tenon saw, ensure we've got a good grip on this end, index finger out, holding it in a good position. We're then going to take the teeth off the tenon saw. We're going to rest it into the V groove we've just previously made. Once that is in there, we're going to make sure we start from the very tip, or the back of the tenon saw I should say, and we're going to draw down once, twice, 3 times. The reason for that is it gives a nice little groove for us to start before we begin sawing properly. So I'm going to come in, line up, draw back once, take the saw out, draw back twice, take the saw out, draw back 3 times, and now I've got a bit of a groove. I can then start to come in and saw back and forward. So using the full length of the tenon saw with each saw. And I'm making sure I stop with the tenon saw when I get to the line at the bottom of my marked out section. I'm then going to loosen off this in the vise and then move my guide piece of wood, waste wood, to the other side of the marked out section I'm going to cut out and place it back into the vise again. From here, same process, tenon saw on, good grip onto the tenon saw, and then I'm just going to draw back once, twice, and 3 times in that V groove there, and from there I can then start to saw down again. So I have put the piece of MDF a bit low in the vise. I'm just going to readjust that back up a wee bit higher so I can now cut down to that final waste point. And now stopping just before the line here. So we should have a piece of MDF that starts to look a bit like this. I'm now going to need to do something to cut out the bottom of this waste section here so I can free up this bit of wood away from the MDF. So to do that, I'm going to put my piece of work back into the vise, secure it in, and I'm going to take this tool here. So what we have here is our coping saw. Okay, we're going to use this to come in and saw a little curve in here to then take out this piece of waste wood. When we are sawing with the coping saw and we start to twist the saw in position, we need to make sure we continuously saw with it. If we twist the saw when it is static and not moving, we can quite easily snap the blade here. So I'm going to come in with my coping saw now. I'm going to run down the line that's already been cut previously with the tenon saw, and just before the bottom I'm going to start to cut into this waste groove to then circle it round and cut off that last little section. So I'm going to draw back once, twice, get a little groove, and as I saw, I'm twisting the blade at the same time, twisting the handle. And there, our piece of waste wood just falls out like that. We now need to take out this waste wood section on our cross halving joint for the part 1 section of the mobile device stand. So to do that, we are going to place something called a bench hook, which looks a bit like this, onto our bench. We're going to place our piece of material on top of that, and then we're going to take either a quick release clamp that looks a bit like this. We release it by pressing the button in here, sliding it along, or sliding it back, using the handle here to tighten it in, or a G clamp that looks a bit like this. The reason why it's called a G clamp is because of its shape that looks a bit like a G. Okay, and we can adjust this by rotating here, or like this way around. Okay, so we've got this onto here. We're going to use a chisel for this bit, but as part of our safety rules for chisel, we must make sure this is securely clamped down to the bench. So doing that, I'm going to take one of my clamps, I'm going to pop it underneath the bench, I'm going to clamp it down using the handle here, making sure it's nice and secure. Give it a wee shake, make sure it's not going to go anywhere. Happy with that. So the reason we've done that is because when we've used the coping saw, we've ended up leaving a little bit of material here that needs to be taken out. So to do that, we're going to take our 12mm chisel, and we're going to take another tool called a wooden mallet. Okay, and that looks a bit like this. So I'm simply going to take my bevel chisel, ensuring I've got the flat side onto the MDF like that, and I'm just going to line it up with the section that I've got left from the little pencil, like a pencil line I did at 50mm previously. I'll line that up, place the chisel vertically. Once that is lined up, I can then take my mallet and strike down on the chisel. And then what that's done is it's taken out the little bit of waste material that was sitting at the bottom of this section here. And with that, we have finished one half of the cross halving joint for the mobile device stand. We are now going to repeat the process on part 2, starting off with our marking knife and V-groove here. Once you repeat the process to take out the waste material in part 2, you should now be able to test if your cross halving joint works by putting the two pieces together to now form your mobile device stand. In preparation, ready for shaping of your design on the top now, and then eventually gluing together and decorating with paint.